So for my first video on rendering fabric, I've chosen denim, and I've just roughed things in and left part of my pencil drawing to show, so you can see how simple my drawing was. I did not draw out the texture. The reason is we're working dark to light because this is basically a 70% base tone, and I would lose that drawing anyway. And like I say, you don't want to actually render all the weave in a fabric. Therefore, what I did is I blocked in 80%. I actually left a little bit of light space between seams and then used a 50 to go over the top of that to progressively darken. And as you can see, I actually maintain the location of a major seam in the pants there. And this ring here, this loop, is going to actually be a little lighter than the surrounding area. That's fine. I'm going to bring that back with pencil. Also blocked in the knit shirt, which is a rare case of being able to go right to black. Here, I actually just blocked in a black tone. I'm going to put 50 over it. And then what I'm going to do is work my way through the entire piece. Again, I'm just going to add another layer of 50 over what was the first pass with 80% gray. So quite a dark tone to start. And you got to get dark enough to make the white pencil really show and work effectively. In this case, I'm just doing all over a filling with tone. I'm not really trying to go in the direction of the weave or anything. I just want to get this filled because the weave is going to take over. That's pretty good right there. So now, indicating fabric weave. I'll start with the loop here because you see a definite diagonal pattern. I actually did put a few strokes in. What I'm going to do here is actually unevenly indicate those. So I'm actually going to really kind of sketch that in, letting my line break. And I won't finish the whole render, I just want to show you enough so you can see technique and approach. So start with a deep base tone, solid tone. Maintain your seams. So as I do this, I'm going to strengthen these in places. This is that lighter cotton weave, which is kind of the hallmark of denim, is that you have a non-dyed cotton interwoven with a dyed cotton. And now I'm going to do this. I'm actually going to do a blend right over the top, very light pressure. And here again. And then I'm going to take that 50 and just lightly blend in. So this is similar to the render I did of marble, where I start to layer a bit. Probably not going to be as much layering here. There are two stitches working. There's an orange stitch that goes up the middle, and then there is the well, really one stitch. That's one stitch up the middle, and then the actual weave crossing over it. I'm kind of protecting that area, not leaving it dark. And I'm going to bring up this weave a little stronger. And there is a kind of a bleached out point on the edge of the loop. When fabric comes under stress, like it's turned over, you will see it kind of break a little bit, and it shows up as a lighter color. That happens with leather as well. Can happen with canvas. And already I've got the basic pattern. Now if I want to do the stitching in the middle, I can start that now. I tend to want to do it after I get the weave in place. And just like that, I've got that first step. Now, stitching is dimensional. It lifts off the surface, so I put a shadow next to it. Just a dark stroke of pencil in this case. I could even ink this, but I'll use pencil for now. Then let's actually make the loop pop out from the background a bit. You can see there's deep shadowing here and here. I'm going to be conservative in the use of the black pencil at this point. I've got weave I want to indicate here. And like I say, white pencil over black is not the best formula. should be the other way around. But look at all that deep, rich black tone I get. Now, because I'm markering this in, mixing the pencil into the marker, I can now draw on that. I can actually work with white pencil again. That's getting me into the range of a 90% tone. Now, there's all these kind of erratic wrinkles in denim, which you see happening in the band around the waist. I'm going to start those just with tone. It's subtle at first. And here's how I start to bring up those tones. I'm going to use a 10% cool gray. And I'm going to start with just some light tone blending. Again, I'm looking at my reference, observing what's going on here. And so I'm literally using the texture of the paper to create a nice texture, which just happens to simulate the level of texture you get on denim. And you'll find this is true with skin, like human skin. You can actually simulate that slight texture that skin has just by using the nap of the paper. And this time I'm going to blend, but I'm going to blend with a lighter marker because I don't want to darken it. This is a subtle transition I put on here. So I just blend it a little bit, and in between I will now go in with a 50 again. Actually, is that a 50? That's a 70. Let's do a 70. I'll go with that. And I'm going to literally start deepening those little shadow areas to show the undulation of the fabric. Start the same thing over here on the other side of the loop. And then I will use a 50. I'll get it when the caps come off. Now we'll just leave that be. Okay, so I'm going to just flow the 50 over the top. And just give a smoother feel to that. So now I've got the base tones in, changing on the surface. So here we go with white pencil. Like I say, don't render the entire pattern, just where it lifts up into view, which means the light hits this area, it's distressed more. And very linear. I'm actually maintaining a diagonal pattern like I see in my reference. Disappears into shadow. You could actually go through and then just take marker and obliterate it, but I'd really rather just not have that extra step. But sometimes it's easier if you do this, it's easier to carry the line right through, just increase pressure on the light area. It's like a topographic map. Up here, let's bring up some of the texture up here. So one thing you'll note, I'm not just drawing a steady weight pressure line all the way through. I'm using variable pressure because we want that inconsistency of a weave that you see in denim. Now here I'm going to actually add to that inconsistency by putting a little bit of like a stipple pattern in here. That gives me my first hint at this being a denim fabric. Knock this back just by putting a 50 over. By the way, when you put cool grays over white pencil, it gives it cools the pencil down. You can even give it a slight blue cast, which is fine for denim. Now, I can actually bring, using a black pencil, there is a darker like shadow tone. I can actually bring that into focus a bit more too. And that's where we really start to make it look like a fabric. I can also use it to go into the shadow areas and just drop a little light tone. So I'm in tone mode right now. I'm going to get these areas to separate a bit more. Plus, I might say indicate a dark edge down here. We have a stitch line that runs along there, so I think what I will do is, let's take care of that. Looks like it's actually a different material, so I'm going to knock that back. Now, really, keeping that lighter was just to keep the location of that two pieces of fabric coming together. So at this point, I'm actually going to bury that lighter tone and then kind of hide it by pulling more shadow up, like that. At this point, I feel like I could add the stitch. Like that. And you can see what's going on. It's back and forth, but this time instead of doing a marble texture, we're actually doing a woven texture, but we're actually blending back and forth, going from drawing mode into tone mode. Right here, I'm just going to highlight this kind of washed out quality to the edge of the loop. Up here, let's say I would like to show how this is typical of jeans, you know, and they tend to get a little like a bleached out look at the top of a seam where there's more distress on the fabric. And you can see I now have a light source established pointing down like I do in my reference, which adds to the reality. And what I would do now is I would actually pick that same light source up on the edge of the pocket. And again, uneven strokes. Just kind of pull that around. And I just check the direction of my fabric weave is always the same. Well, it's actually slightly different here on the main body of the pant. It's going up a bit more, whereas here on the strip around the waist it goes more sideways. I think I'll actually indicate that to show that it's a different piece of fabric. So I kind of get a roll going, and then I say, okay, where do I want the highlights to show? Where do I want the light to catch on the fabric? So I quite literally hit that point, and you know what? I should indicate where the stitching comes in, so let's actually do that. So I have an idea. And let's actually now carry forward with this weave, which kind of goes right up at this angle along that seam. And so you can see pretty quickly you start to get the effect of denim. It doesn't really take a lot of effort to start seeing the results. I do love rendering denim. It's one of the easier renders I think to do, and one of the more rewarding because it has distinct textures that really show, versus say a satin where it's almost like you're doing brushed metal at times. Here I'm actually separating out that little metal ring, show that it has a shadow cast under it. I'm just putting a stroke of black there, and there's a little pinching of the fabric around it, so I'm going to start it with the dark tones like this. And again, you see I'm in blend mode. I'm just doing a feathered tone. Time to sharpen. So then I follow through with white. Now here, like I did up here, I'm going to actually start with a blend. And then what I'll do is I'll start adding the pattern of the weave on top of that. And like so. And pay attention to what's going on here. The weave of the fabric, if this is bowing up, I'm going to pass over the top like that. And then as it disappears, it'll go down and curve back up again. Same thing here. If this is bowing up, show that. in the render, and try to make sure they connect and flow in the same direction. You can actually do like a continuous line like this if it helps to keep lining up things. Like I say, if I take this approach just to show you, I can actually just lightly stroke in the weave like that. And actually it does line up better because now I can see each one lining up. And then what I would do is I'd actually take the 50%, for example, and I would blot out or knock back the shadow areas to make it look like the weave is disappearing into shadow. Actually, I think that might be a little bit more successful strategy. I can track my lines more successfully. And you can see I'm getting this little hint of a puckering around that butt. Dimensionality is what you're going for in these renders. You don't want it to all look like it's flat, like it's a piece of paper with just marks on it. You really want it to look like the fabric has that thickness to it that denim has, and that it's bunching up at seams, that it's getting distressed along the edges of seams. And I'll just continue a little bit more before I'll stop this video. So here I'm picking up a brief bit of light, and I'm lifting my pencil each way. And I actually like the way that one turned out, so I'm going to repeat it. Like I say, it doesn't have to be perfect. You can always correct and manipulate it later. And then I can do a second pass here, and I put the 50% gray marker over here. So here's where you would do a second layer. I'm actually third layer. 2 layers of marker and then pencil, and then another layer of marker will go over the top of this, and I can actually bring this into view more as more of a highlight. So one thing you will see is that there's more of a there's a crossing pattern. Each of the little thread is actually like a little piece of rope. There's different ways I can do that. I can do a little hint of that by putting cross strokes across, but I think the more effective strategy is actually to once again take the black pencil, separate the rows a little bit, and then maybe kind of occasionally break these rows. So otherwise it starts to look a little bit like a corduroy, which can happen. And that actually is just about right there. So those tiny breaks mimic the denim pattern. Let's see. I actually went up into the upper strap around the waist here. So what I'm going to do is bury that in black. Put a bit of a stroke or shadow under the stitching, and then what I would like to do is reestablish the shadow. I just pushed that farther down and went into this thread pattern here. So there's again an example of how you can modify as you go. If my pencil got out of control there, I just take the white eraser and lift that area out, and just get back down to the paper and go try again. You can do that. You can see I'm getting a little bit of burnishing with the white going over a bit of black pencil. And I'm going to separate these stitches a little bit more with a touch of black pencil, like that. And you know, this is not finished yet, but it's starting to take on this kind of a characteristic. You do have little bits of metal, so like on this metal ring, you go back into your metal rendering mode, and you say, I gotta have a highlight. So let's bring a bright side up on this ring, and maybe over here too. And then, gotta have a sharp edge, right? That's nature metallic, and a dark shape up against the bright, and there you go. You can also create like a little bevel edge, like that. That's what I mean about bringing the illustration into focus. This is coming into focus. The other thing I wanted to show is on the shirt here. This is a knit weave. It's black though, but so easy to render. Look how I do this. I just set up the cables. Cable pattern that kind of bows out and bows in. So these are like guidelines. that I start with. And I'm just looking at my reference. It might be hard to see on the video, but the way the fabric flexes, you can see there's a place where it bows out here. So that's how I start. And here I do want my spacing to be pretty even because that is the nature of a knit fabric. And now just doing a soft blend, I'm going to bring up the ridges in that sweater. So right now this is where I say it just looks like pencil on top of marker. So how do you get to that point where it starts to look more like what it's supposed to be? And that is where the layering and blending comes into play. So what I'm going to do is drop it into shadow as it approaches the top of the jean, because that's what I see here in the reference. I can also further deepen the shadows in between. And I'm even going to go up top here and just darken that a bit. And in fact, you know what, now I'm actually going to put strokes right over everything like this. Really integrate, and you can do this sometimes. I'm actually taking the side of my thumb and I'm just kind of dry wiping that. You get a little bit of marker on your thumb, but that's okay. Now there are cases where you can smear a little bit to kind of help things along. You've got to be careful though in detail areas with that. So I'm looking at this sweater pattern, and I'm thinking I can't really see much detail in the knit pattern, so I might just kind of make this up a little bit. Give it a little bit more form. So I'm putting like a weak sketchy line on both sides here. I'm also going to, again, emphasize that it bows out, so I'm going to pick up on the highlight. And then I might even say, what if I try adding a little bit of pattern in between? I may not go with this. Not sure I like that. Again, it's always experimentation. I'll knock that back a bit. Actually, it kind of does help because there should be a little information in between the light areas. Now what I'm going to do is take not the 100% black, but I'm going to go with a dark tone. Let's go with 80 again. Actually, it's amazing. This looks like black, right? It's not really. It's actually close to black, but it's not. I can still show a hint of a shadow. And that's where that sensitivity to values and tones really comes into play. The more you look at your subject, the more you'll become aware of the subtle changes. And sometimes those subtle changes really make all the difference. They make something look more real. Again, we're going for the optical effect of light on all these textures that we're rendering out. And one of the rules of thumb of optical effects is that you have light and shadow causing textures and details to disappear, either because they're blown out in a highlight or because they're getting buried in a shadow. It also makes it look like the sweater is behind the jeans, which it is in the reference. So I'd leave that for now and just I'll conclude this particular video at this moment.